It shouldn't come as a shock that Luis Robert Jr. suffered another season-ending injury, and it shouldn't come as a shock that the team is still going to exercise his club option for next season. Let's discuss on today's episode of Locked On White Sox.
You are Locked On White Sox, your daily Chicago White Sox podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, I'm your host, Todd Welter, a lifelong Sox fan and contributor for SouthsideShowdown.com, part of the Fan Side of the network, and also I've covered Major League Baseball for outlets such as the Associated Press. And thanks for making Locked On White Sox your first listen every day, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Make sure to hit the like button on today's episode. Subscribe to the YouTube channel at Locked On White Sox if you've not done so already. Additionally, follow or subscribe to the show wherever you get your podcasts. GM Chris Getz said the team is still committed to Luis Robert Jr. despite him now possibly being out for the season with a hamstring strain. Let's discuss a bunch of points that I want to make in this first segment. Then I want to discuss why losing the series to the Royals was actually super disappointing. And finally, I want to clarify why the White Sox should actually spend some money on the bullpen this offseason. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off your first purchase. All right, so I admit I have gone back and forth on Luis Robert Jr.'s status for next season. I mean, I was definitely in the pro-trade Luis Robert Jr. camp before the deadline because of the injury risk. You know, get something rather than getting absolutely nothing for him because it was just a matter of time before he gets injured again. Although, to be fair to him, all players suffer muscle strains. It happens. And he was at least charging down the line. I know it doesn't make it any better to know that, oh, he's hurt again, but he was hustling down the first baseline. This wasn't like him just turning like last year in the cold weather and straining his adductor muscle, that type of stuff. Or this wasn't a Yoan Moncada or Eloy Jimenez situation. You know, it's just one of those freak things. But still, he's going to, again, miss an extended period of time. And it does get tiring. So that's why I was like, just get something and let's move on. But I get GM Chris Getz's point that he didn't have to trade him because he still has the 2 years of club control. And that's why Chris Getz is, again, doubling down on his bet because he did say the team is committed to keeping Luis Robert Jr. for, next season. So here comes in where a couple of things sound contradictory, yet can be true. Two things can exist and still be true at the same time. One, by not trading LRJ at the deadline, Getz had no choice but to pick up this $20 million option. You can't lose the trade asset status. However, you can be upset with Chris Getz for having this misguided belief, and he's got to give up this belief teams will ever meet his high asking price. And for those that said, don't trade Louis for pennies on the dollar, the injury history and the inconsistency will ensure he never gets traded for the full return value or even a markup. Two, since the White Sox have no long-term replacement in center field, it is fine to keep Luis Robert Jr. around at least for next season. But move heaven and earth to find his long-term replacement. Three, his injury history is slightly different from Yoan Moncada, Tim Anderson, and Eloy Jimenez. So those that are going to be like, well, they moved on from those three guys. So you can sort of live with his annual IL stint, which I'll get to. And four, you still though have to wonder, is Jerry Reinsdorf on board to pick up this $20 million option? Or is he going to kneecap his handpicked GM for wanting to give $20 million to a guy who just hit 223? Because you got to remember, you can think $20 million is now a drop in the bucket in terms of MLB player payroll. And it usually is now these days. An average player is getting $15 million, like Luis Robert Jr. But this is still a team that has never signed a player to a $100 million contract. The going rate for at least solid talent. So $20 million is a lot of money to Jerry Reinsdorf. But in terms of the trade asset status, I think it's still there. So I don't think we can just be like, well, let's just get rid of him and let's move on. Because he can still play in elite defensive center field. He has 7 outs above average this year. And the ground he covers to rob doubles and triples, that is huge for any team. Any team would want a guy that can cover that much ground and take away hits. He's a huge key in run prevention. Because remember, you got to score runs and prevent runs to win the ideal 90 to 95 wins or 90 to 95 games. He can also steal bases. He's had over 30 stolen bases this year. He can pound left-handed hitting. He's got an over 290 career average there. And despite hitting, though, 28 home runs over the past 2 seasons, he still does have some pop in his bat, as evidenced by the career-high 38 he hit in 2023. And he's going to finish as a near raised floor player with a 1.2 fWAR. I mean, obviously, you would like to see him finish with a 1.5 or a 2, but still, he's at that near raised floor player level. Not ideal to pay somebody $20 million. And even Fangraphs' production to dollar value says you pay that type of guy $10 million. But you still do need to keep this youngish, talented player who can impact the game, in the field, on the base pass, and at the plate. You still, and especially since he's 27 years old or 28, he's relatively youngish. You still got to at least hold out hope that it can all come together for a decent, beyond just this, post All-Star break stretch. We're talking about like a May and June where it can come together. He somehow stays healthy, and then you can deal him for something decent. You're never going to get 100% for 100% or 125% markup. You're just not, because teams are going to keep pointing to injuries and inconsistency. And that was well covered by multiple national reporters about Luis Robert Jr.'s trade market. And make no mistake about it, though, he's going to have to get traded. Because even I said, why don't you try to drive down his price with an extension, for 3 years maybe. But it's not going to happen. He's represented by Scott Boras. Scott Boras doesn't agree to extensions. He takes his guys to free agency. But no contender is going to say, yeah, here's my top 5 2 of my top 5 prospects, or here's a major league talent. I mean, teams are going to view him as a rental. I don't see a contender paying him $20 million in 2027, especially if there's a salary cap, for kind of the value he brings. He's only valuable to the White Sox. I mean, that's the thing that we got to think about it. He where he's got high, and not value, I mean high value, where he's highly, highly regarded. It's only to the White Sox. A lot of contenders would just see him as a supporting player and being like, yeah, he's a rental. That's what he was being viewed at. It was well reported. But can you still get a raised floor player like Miguel Vargas or Curtis Mead? Maybe. And there's nothing wrong with trying to do that. I mean, that's the only way I ever see the Sox getting, say, a top 100 prospect ever coming back. The graduated guy who struggled but can still possibly be reclaimed. I could see that. And, those guys can still help you long term. So that's why you got to stop. So that's why you still got to protect the trade asset status. But you got to stop being Ishmael Chris Getz. You got to stop chasing this white whale. And where I combine my second and third point is the White Sox do have to find their center fielder of the future. And I hope Getz's next evolution is that he starts drafting center fielders high in the draft. I see him and Nick Shirley getting the point, getting it more and more. Draft catchers, draft pitchers, draft shortstops for the value, the positional versatility they bring. But you also got to do the same then with center fielders. And right now, Jaden Foskey, yes, the scouting report suggests he could play center, but he's more likely destined for a corner spot. So that means in next year's draft class or international free agency or in some sort of trade in the offseason, you've got to start loading up at center, and you've got to get some options to where you can feel comfortable to move on from LRJ. Because you had Miguel Vargas and Brian Ramos in the system to feel confident that you could move on from Yoel Moncada, who just played in 12 games last year and 92 in 2023. At least LRJ has played in 100 games or more the past 3 seasons. You had Colson Montgomery eventually to come up to move on from TA's injuries. And Eloy, well, he couldn't put the ball in the air. But that was why it was a slam dunk to move on from those guys, but not with Robert Jr. And I want to discuss this more after the break, and then I want to get into why the White Sox were disappointing, in terms of losing to the Royals. So I want to discuss that after the break. Hey, Locked On White Sox fans, are you still paying full price for gas? Stop leaving money behind. Get real cash back every time you fill up with the free Upside app. Simply download the free Upside app in the App Store or Google Play right now and start earning cash at the pump today. You can use my limited time promo code SEASON and get an extra 25 cents back per gallon on your first fill up. You can make up to $300 a year just from buying the gas you already need. At first, I thought this was too good to be true, but it's totally legit. Real people are getting paid just to make their daily commutes, and you can too. Plus, you can cash out anytime to your bank account, PayPal, or e-gift card for Amazon or other brands. Don't let this offer drive on by. Download the free Upside app now. Use my limited time promo code SEASON for limited time 25 cent per gallon bonus. That's promo code SEASONS. Offers vary by user and location. Go to upside.com for terms and conditions. Welcome back to Locked On White Sox. I'm your host, Todd Welter, and we have an important request. Locked On wants to hear from you. We've put together a survey to learn more about our listeners and make your favorite podcast even better. This is your chance to tell us what you like, what you don't, and answer questions about our advertising. Go to lockedonpodcast.com/survey to get started. Everyone who completes the survey will be entered for a chance to win one of 10 $100 Amazon gift cards. Again, that's lockedonpodcast.com/survey. You can also find the link in the show notes. Thanks for helping us out. All right, so I just want to quickly wrap up Luis Robert Jr.'s future with the White Sox. And again, the difference, like, say, between, and I've been bouncing, I know I've been going back and forth, and I've been doing a lot of reflection on this. But again, one of the reasons why, again, it was so easy to move on from Yohan Moncada and his injury histories and his injury issues was you did have, again, Miguel Vargas, even though he was struggling, and Brian Ramos. You had him in the system to feel confident that you could move on. Colson Montgomery, you had these guys. You don't have any of these guys that you can say, this is a slam dunk. We can easily move on from Luis Robert Jr. in your system. You just don't. Brooks Baldwin is not going to be it. He's a super utility guy of the future. So you still have to go find your center fielder of the future. And you're going to have to do it anyway because, again, there are now just two ships passing in the night. The club control is going to run out by the time this team gets back to being competitive. And I just don't see, Luis Robert Jr. signing an extension. I mean, he might be liking things. Maybe he stays. But again, say he keeps getting hurt and he's only playing 115 games. Do you keep paying this guy and dealing with his injuries and his inconsistency? So that's the thing that they definitely have to do. But the other thing is, I'm still interested to see if Jerry does authorize a $5 million raise for a guy who, while playing better before the injury, will still finish with the overall 223, 297, 364 slash line and a WRC plus of 83. Because this is the owner who once said publicly in a symposium, he hates it when other owners pay that much for a player with similar production. I think he was referring to the Carlos Correa deal. So will he hijack his handpicked GM like he did with Rick Hahn and Kenny Williams when he hired Tony La Russa to be the manager during the title contention window? Or when he ordered Ron Schuler to execute the white flag trade in 1997? I mean, this is a guy who has hijacked or kneecapped his GM before. So I'm very interested to see if he lets his handpicked GM exercise this option so the GM can stick to his guns and still look good and still look like, hey, I didn't have to trade him, and I could still potentially, cash out big time on this major gamble. Or Jerry might say, I don't care if I got no other payroll obligations other than Andrew Benintendi. I don't pay that production that much money. So that's going to be interesting to see. Now, in terms of two, kind of contradictory statements that can be true at the same time, I can go to, I have been saying losing doesn't matter this season. I have said that. And I'm going to contradict myself in a little bit because sometimes the way the team loses does matter and can be frustrating and can be like, what am I watching? Why are you losing this way? And you would like to see this young core start figuring out ways to win, say, tight ball games. The team is still 9-30 in single run games. Or you want to see this team start to show signs that they can be competitive in the division. Basically, you want to see progression, not regression. And when the White Sox do lose this season, it's not normally because they're overmatched lately. It's usually because they can't win tight ball games because their bullpen is terrible. Or they have these issues like a very bad starting pitcher like Aaron Savali. And the other reason why this series loss to the Royals is super disappointing is they went from dominating the Kansas City Royals through the first 16 innings to getting totally dominated over the final 11. In terms of the going from the dominating to being dominated, they went from outscoring the Royals 11-0 through the first 16 innings to getting outscored 17-1 through the final 11. 5 runs over the final 2 innings on Tuesday, 12 runs last night. And the offense's only response was an Andrew Benintendi solo shot. You want to make progress and move forward as a young core. You don't want to take 4 steps back because your bullpen can't protect the lead. Your starting pitcher, Aaron Savali, who gave up 5 runs again last night, and then Tyler Gilbert comes in and gives up 3 more in a Royals 8-run 5th inning on 2 outs. There was 2 outs. Savali and Gilbert could not get the final out. That's frustrating. That's tough to see. That's tough to watch, to go from being up 1-0, in the game to being completely out of it 8-1. Think about how bad last night was. Corey Lee had to come in and pitch the final 2 innings. And the bullpen, you think about it, I'm not counting Corey Lee's 2 runs that he gave up, but the bullpen gave up 8 runs during critical turning points in Tuesday night's game and last night's game. And what is Aaron Savali still doing here? He's been terrible this month. A 7.46 ERA. That you just got to wonder, why not just bring back Sean Burke to work through his issues in the big leagues? Again, wins and losses, I have said, don't matter. When they do lose, celebrate the wins. When they do lose, look at the context. If it's because they were overmatched, okay, you're overmatched, you're out-talented. But it's because you're basically self-inflicting yourself like this one. Yeah, it's super disappointing. But why not let Burke work through some things? And you lost the trade with Milwaukee, okay? You lost Aaron Savali for Andrew Vaughn deal. And it's okay to admit it. Teams make bad trades. All teams make bad trades. They do. Even the Dodgers make bad trades. It happens. But just cut your losses and move on. Aaron Savali is not going to be part of the team next year. Sean Burke should be part of the team next year, so give him a shot. Although, for the record, last 7 games, Vaughn, 150 average with a 430 OPS. Last 15 games, 208 with a 597 OPS. Never seen that before, #sarcasm. But Savali's just not giving the White Sox a shot to win at all in his last 5 starts. White Sox have lost 4 straight games that he's started. He's given up 21 earned runs in 5 starts. So why not just give next month's starts that Savali's supposed to be making back to Burke? Just do that. But the White Sox went from making a statement to, against a division foe that has had their number all season to just getting absolutely dominated like the Royals have been doing. Bobby Witt Jr. and Salvador Perez should just be given a stake in the team with the way they just own White Sox pitching. And it's just 1 step forward, 3 steps back all season because of, things like the bullpen and a pitcher like Aaron Savali. And that is why the White Sox must upgrade the bullpen in the offseason. And I'll discuss why it's okay that they actually spend some money on it in the offseason after the break. There's nothing like catching a baseball game live, the energy, the crowd, the chance to see your team in person. But actually getting tickets, that's the tough part. Queues, login screens, surprise fees. It just takes all the fun out of it. And that's why I use Game Time, the app that gives the advantage back to the fans. Game Time is fast, easy, and backed by the Game Time guarantee. You'll always get 100% authentic tickets delivered on time and at the best price. Plus, All fees are included, so the price you see is the price you pay. And I love that because, your complete total upfront with no surprise fees at checkout. And I love the zone deals too. Pick the section, Game Time picks the seats, and you save big. Plus, you see the exact view from the seat before you're buying. So no surprises. You'll know, like, maybe this might be an objective view, so it might be worth, the cheapness, but maybe I might want to get something a little bit better. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, that's promo code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off. Swipe, tap, ticket, go. Download Game Time today. Welcome back to Locked On White Sox. I'm your host, Todd Welter. Again, shout out to all the everydayers. I appreciate your loyalty. Please hit the like button on today's episode. Recommend to your fellow Sox fans or baseball fans, friends, to subscribe to the YouTube channel at Locked On White Sox, wherever they get their podcasts, as this show's available on all major podcast platforms. All right, so I keep seeing in the comments on the YouTube channel or on White Sox Twitter or in the social media world, this resistance to spending just a little bit of money in the offseason on the bullpen. And for example, I'm seeing comments like, well, bad teams have bad bullpens. Okay. Well, seeing the trade market at the deadline the past 2 seasons, maybe bad teams should have good bullpens before the trade deadline to leverage that market. Contenders are looking for bullpen help. Contenders are realizing, you know what? Sometimes the biggest outs in the postseason don't come in the first, second, third, or fourth inning. Even the fifth, they may come in the 6th, 7th, or 8th. Starting pitching is great to have, but you still need guys that can handle high leverage situations. You still need a guy like an Ohtani killer, like the Padres tried to acquire. You still need that matchup maybe late in the game. That's why contenders are paying through the nose for relievers. And yes, I am, again, 2 things can be true, okay? I'm in complete agreement in the big picture that as long as Jerry Reinsdorf owns the team, the front office should never spend big money on the bullpen because, again, he only limits so much money to be spent. And that's one of the things that helped shut, the contention window that was supposed to be very long from last decade's rebuild to only 2 seasons because they, Rick Hahn spent a ton of money on the bullpen, and then there just was never enough money left over to address second base or right field. That being said, this current rebuild is nowhere near a 2021 type team. That spending money on the bullpen is going to prevent the team from solving second base or right field or signing that impact free agent, that player that gets you over the top. And they're just, I doubt they're going to make a splash free agent signing this offseason. I would love for them to go get Kyle Schwarber's power bat, have him be the DH for the next 4 years. Don't get me wrong. I would love that. I'd be dancing and celebrating. I just don't think they're going to do that. I don't think they're going to sign Pete Alonso. So that's why if Jerry Reinsdorf does authorize a little bit more money to be spent in the offseason, why not shop in the bullpen free agent market? And this is what I want to clarify before you're jumping into the comments. You shop in the figurative discount 1-year deal market, not the scrap heap that Chris Getz shopped in last offseason, because that's where Chris Getz got this bullpen, in the junkyard. And sometimes there's nothing wrong with going to the junkyard for a guy or 2, but completely building your bullpen around basically figurative guys that have been thrown to the scrap heap, that's not a good idea. I mean, it didn't hurt to kick the tires on James Karinchak, but he was done. He was toast. For all those guys that he brought in off the scrap heap, only Dan Altavilla seems to have panned out, and he's hurt right now. And every day, as you might remember me in the offseason, I was advocating for going to at least the discount rack rather than the junkyard. Because at the discount rack, you could possibly find some better relievers on 1-year deals that can handle some high leverage situations rather than go dumpster diving for guys like Penn Murphy or Bryce Wilson or Tyler Gilbert. Maybe not trading a high ceiling prospect for a 32-year-old Cam Boozer. Maybe not might be the way to go. As I was saying, like maybe you should have signed Jacob Junis. He's got a 2.52 ERA. Just saying. Get some relievers this offseason who can navigate high leverage. Because the other thing I keep saying, well, the overall bullpen ERA is better than last year. That's true, but context says no. This bullpen's only good in low leverage. So put them in a crunch situation, and they're the worst bullpen in baseball. So find some guys on the 1-year market or maybe the 2-year market, but no more than that can at least give you a shot to get some outs in high leverage situations. Maybe you try to see if Devin Williams, a spot track, projects that he should probably get a $5 million contract. Why not spend $5 million to see, can he reclaim himself? Maybe he just melted down in New York. Maybe he couldn't handle the pressure. Maybe going down a few markets. He could revive himself. And then you flip him at the deadline. Maybe you find some guys that you can flip. Because right now, this bullpen that I think you can move forward with is Grant Taylor, where I just think they have to figure out, is he the 7th inning guy? Is he 8th inning guy? Is he the 9th inning guy? So they still have to give him shots. I'm not saying completely, I've seen people demote, say, let's demote him. I think you got to give him, you got to use him a little bit more regularly to give him a shot. And you just got to figure out what situations can he handle. Maybe he is more of a 7th inning guy. We don't know. And again, his arm will dictate how you develop him. Do you develop him to his ceiling or his floor? I think you've got Mike Vassell as your long reliever. As long as you ask him to be a long reliever, they've asked him to do a bunch of roles. I get the ERA and the FIP don't match up, but it's still a 4 FIP. Maybe you can get that down to 3. But if you're looking for a long reliever, you need a cheap long reliever, and that's fine. I think Brandon Iser could potentially be your lefty medium leverage guy. Like, again, if you need a guy to get you through the 6th, I think he's got the stuff to kind of help you get through the 6th, maybe even the 7th, but I wouldn't put him in high leverage at all. But you still got to fill out then 5 spots. And I do keep advocating, can you start auditioning some guys that can help you in 2026? Because I don't think Tyler Gilbert's the answer. I don't think Steven Wilson might be the answer, but he's, again, not a great high leverage guy. He's okay. He's like the one few guys that you can trust, but he can still melt down. I get Jordan Leisure because he's one of your few fire ballers, but he's got to stop with this, 3 good outings, absolutely gets destroyed. 3 good outings, absolutely gets destroyed. Like, he's got to be more consistent in nailing down games, that type of stuff. But they need to find some guys that they can legit help them and help this young core learn to win in high leverage situations. And don't get me wrong, again, I would be all for the White Sox eventually spending, but that's probably not going to be until 2028 or 2027 when the team is hopefully competitive. Then I would rather see the resources obviously be allocated to signing, say, a stud center fielder to replace Luis Robert Jr. or to pull off that trade to get a stud center fielder to replace Luis Robert Jr. I'd be all for getting a power mashing first baseman. I would be all for using money on a starting pitcher at the top of the rotation, that type of stuff that they might have to get. But again, right now, this team is just not at that point. So why not, again, use the limited money to get some relievers to help this young core actually finally win in some of these high leverage situations and some of these tight games, and then flip some of those guys for potential long-term help. That's all I'm saying. Well, that wraps up this edition of Locked On White Sox. But before I go, it's another big moment on Locked On college football fans. Locked On and Fire TV present College Football Kickoff, your ultimate college football weekly preview. Drake Toll of Locked On Big 12 leads the conversation alongside 2-time AP Coach of the Year Gary Patterson and former college star Jesse Holley and Locked On local experts. A college football preview only Locked On can do. First episode is out right now. Catch College Football Kickoff every Thursday throughout the season only on Fire TV. And I'll be back tomorrow to discuss what I wanted to discuss today. But again, the Luis Robert Jr. news pushed it back. That is discussing the White Sox, if they should extend some of these rookies. Feel free to leave comments about today's discussion regarding Luis Robert Jr.'s latest injury and the reason the team still has to keep him, the disappointment of losing the series to the Royals, and why the team should spend some money on the bullpen in the offseason. You can leave them at the episode page on YouTube, X, formerly Twitter, at Todd J. Dub, or at Locked On Sox, or you can email me at lockedonwhitesox@gmail.com. Have a great day. Talk to you tomorrow.